Greetings and salutations. This is Abe Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where you may not have all the answers to your questions, but we're going to ask a lot of questions or something like that. Anyway, you can also become a bitter pill or a spoonful of sugar. You can visit thebittertruth.info. And we got a Patreon link there. You can help us out there. You can get some fabulous swag, make your life better, listen to past shows. Got some articles up. It's a fun site. I finally got it going a couple of months back. Figured after 2+ years of doing this, let's be a grown-up and have a website like everybody else. Today, friend of the show, actual activist, boots on the ground, and has a lot of firsthand knowledge on what we're going to be talking about today. Adrian Boutureira. He's been to Bolivia, he's been to Venezuela, he's been in El Salvador, and not on a Eurail pass. He's been down there doing some real stuff. Adrian, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you, babe. How are you?
Hey, I'm good, man. So, I don't think many Americans know what's been going on this last week or so, but Bolivia, actually voted out a U.S.-installed right-wing oligarch piece of shit government. Why can't we have nice things? How come we can't do that here?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe the failure to even, make that information available may be a place to start. I don't know if you noticed, but, the very next day of this incredible election where, the party of the president that got overthrown, Evo Morales, won in a landslide first round victory, which exceeds the expectations of even, the most positive of progressive folks there and here. The very next day, I am, just every morning I get up and I do a round of news just to see what's going on around the world. And, I decided to incorporate CNN into the lot, just to see what they're up to. And lo and behold, I opened World CNN, and there was absolutely not one single headline about the Bolivian election in under Latin America in CNN World. The Guardian had a nice a little one on the side, and of course, Telesur, had full day coverage of it. But yeah, so we need to start right there. In other words, this is, politically speaking, hugely significant hemispherically, I believe, in terms of once again, people winning against all odds in terms of the struggle against imposed regimes, against the manipulation of elections, against lies, all of which are the standard MO in Latin America under U.S. leadership and its puppet oligarchies. So yeah, I believe that the years of leadership under Evo Morales, which I believe were like 13, went a long way in laying the foundations, if not for arming the people, which might have prevented this coup from even happening. But of course, and we can get into that a little bit later, there is this thing, this quasi-revolutionary regimes in Latin America get elected, and they play ball with the enemy, and then they cry foul when the inevitable happens, right? But that's, it's a little more complicated than that, because you're doomed if you do, and you're doomed if you don't. If you come to power and within the first 4 years you start creating people's militias, then they're going to turn against you anyway. If you don't, then they're going to do everything they can, through the military establishment. Now, the military establishment in Latin America is historically right wing.
Right.
Let us not forget that it was the military establishment that Chavez failed to replace, that overthrew him in the first coup, which was almost successful had it not been because he did a real good job at creating some mid-level officers and pushing up the ranks party, revolutionary supporting young officers, right? And it was those officers that were able to rescue him from his kidnap/coup. And
to clarify, kidnap/coup perpetrated by the Bush administration in the United States.
Yes, I mean, perpetrated by the oligarchy. I mean, we have to, in other words, we have to remember that, yes, the United States, is in charge of giving a lot of the marching orders, but it's not that they, that they have a resilient, oligarchy following these orders against their will. In other words, this is a conspiracy of equally, interested, capitalists in the United States under the leadership of its government, and the oligarchy organized in Latin American countries in whatever way they can, either in power or outside of power. Now, the military has always been an arm of the oligarchy across Latin America. Right. In other words, when the horrible dictatorships ended in Argentina and Chile, in Uruguay, one of the things that had to be considered in many instances, especially in Uruguay, was amnesty. You had to provide, you have to give this people who were throwing people off helicopters and applying electrical shocks to pregnant women in front of the fathers to try to get confessions that were not to be found because they already knew. I'm talking about barbarities, and so the country had to, in the spirit of peace and reconciliation, if you want us to give you the power back, you're gonna have to let us off, and yeah, man, it's been horrible that way. So the military.
This is kind of getting back to Bolivia for a hot second though. I mean, Camacho, from what I read, even if they try to coalesce all of because there was another guy running too, it wasn't just Camacho. If they try to coalesce all the right wing, they still would not have beat Arce, right? Okay,
so there were three parties. There was the Camacho party, and Camacho being like the sort of a key figure in the actual coup against Morales last year,
right?
Leading. They formed these alliances, right? Some of the traditional parties kind of tried to change overcoats and created this different alliances. A guy named Mesa, which basically ran as a center right, and he was the one with the second most votes. Camacho came third, a very distant third, but
they still wouldn't have gotten a 50% plurality, even if they combined their votes.
No, because you got 52% of the vote. Was right. Won by Mas. So no, they the best they would have been able to do was 49%. But we have to a couple of things. That I wanted to connect, about the thought on the military.
Sure.
Now, I share this with, and it kind of brings it back to what you were saying at the beginning of the conversation, Abe. Why not in this country, right? Why can we not, okay, so I want to connect that because I hear from a lot of, well-intentioned and otherwise like intelligent friends of mine, still say like, it can never happen here, like the military in the United States will never allow for someone like Trump to sort of try to, sabotage the democratic process and undermine it and come up with some reason as to why he's not going to relinquish power. And I'm like, even if there are like a couple of like, semi-liberal or Democrat, the military as an institution is a right-wing institution, pretty much everywhere in the world.
Right.
The People's Army, maybe in China being the exception, but when the Chinese, if the Chinese begin to feel that they want to use, the People's Army against the people as they continue to move towards capitalism and betray the revolution, which they may or may not, who knows, man, then the army will they follow orders, and it all depends on whose orders are they going to follow. Now, so there is a question there to understand, what is the fundamental drive and the fundamental ideology of military that has not been necessarily fully purged. It would be interesting. One of my homeworks is to find out how much Trump has purged the military. We know what he's done, across other parts of the government, but I think it would be very, very important to see how much. I must admit that I haven't done that research. Too much. He's done it everywhere else in government. There is hardly an agency, there is hardly a department that he hasn't, cleaned house and put whatever yes people he could.
Sure.
Give him another 4 years, man, and I think he's going to continue to do his sort of version of the purge that I am calling for to happen in Latin America, but in the opposite side of the spectrum.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, and yeah, well, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, when I look at what happened in Bolivia and the rationalization, some of these well-intentioned people that you kind of mentioned. I remember last fall I was at a party and in Austin, and I'm in chewy blue Austin, as are you, and all the chewy blue people, and they're all, Hillary was awesome, and I like Kamala Harris. And then if you say anything, you're negative. If you say anything, you're a racist asshole because you don't like that a quote black woman is a VP candidate, even though she's a Nazi fascist fucking cop. So last year when this Bolivia thing went down, people were, well, 14 years is an awful long time. He was in there a long time. Angela Merkel's been running Germany for 16 years. I don't see us doing a coup in Germany.
Right.
I don't see us doing it. I don't see why when people talk about, quote, the failure of socialism and bring up Venezuela, they don't talk about the failure of capitalism and bring up Colombia. Right? Colombia's got a 40% poverty rate. Colombia kills journalists. They murder campesinos by the thousands. They rig elections. Sounds like human rights violations up the ass to me. But no one ever says that. And even the so-called liberal in this country doesn't bring up the failures of Colombia because they say they're capitalists, which means they give us their shit for free. So how is it that we have this amnesia about everything that we do, and then we're shocked that we get refugees? We're shocked that Hondurans are coming into this country. We're shocked that Guatemalans are coming into this country.
Well, especially in the case of Honduras.
Yeah,
because
right.
I mean, we were key, and I remember, it's insane to think, that the political dialogue was, significantly more intelligent, 4 years ago than it is now, because that was unimaginable then, because the level of the political electoral dialogue was so poor in 2016, but like this year, it topped that. I mean, it's almost like we keep raising the bar, of mediocrity, higher and higher. But I remember distinctively, Clinton and Sanders having a discussion by Univision's hosted debate, and they managed to talk about refugees and Hondurans, for about 4 or 5 minutes, and not once, was the root cause as to, we have these Honduran children at our gate, and what are you going to do about it? And it's like, and not once did it sort of come up that, we may not have this, refugee crisis. We may not have this mass immigration crisis where the United States not jumping at every opportunity to dismantle, undermine, sabotage, blockade, sanction every single regime that happens to go against the interest of global capitalism in order to benefit their population, using the IMF, the World Bank, using trade agreements, using the Organization of American States, and so when you cannot break them, then you try to invade them. You first try to discredit the leadership. If that doesn't work, then you try to sort of feed and fund the opposition. Then when that doesn't work, then you basically, either allow for the imminent coup to happen or you facilitate it yourself. And in Honduras, history will tell us the United States either completely facilitated that coup or was definitely fully complicit in it. The same thing in Bolivia. We know that the leadership of the coup had been in the United States prior to meeting with people in the State Department prior to the coup. We know that the same thing happened with the leadership of the people who led the coup in Venezuela.
Right.
Camacho was key.
Well, let's back up a second, because you touched on something a second ago, and it's a little inside for me and you, but I think we should talk about the OAS for a second, the Organization of American States, and exactly what it is, because they're basically a franchise of the CIA. They're like the Arab League. They don't do anything that they're not told to do by the United States government. Like, and not to go down this rabbit hole, but Sudan just recognized Israel. I'm like, so what? I don't remember Israel having a problem with the Sudan. It's like, oh, but they recognized them. Okay, yeah, because Israel was afraid of Sudan. Fuck you. How about a Palestinian right to return, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The OAS is no different than the Arab League, right? To me. So let's talk about that for a second, because that's exactly who got this coup started last year. The OAS were the ones crying foul in the election when Morales won re-election, right?
Yeah, I mean, the OAS, under the leadership of an Uruguayan who had been a member of the Frente Amplio, which was Mujica's party, and that was the leftist government that ruled the country for since the dictatorship. They managed to come to power, and then they stayed in power for about I think 12 years in a row, and they were just defeated. The guy fed the lies, the disinformation, blatant lies, the fabricated data about the election being fraudulent. You name it. They pulled a CIA stunt under his leadership. The guy ended up being kicked out of the Frente Amplio in Uruguay because of this primarily, but because the guy pretty much went completely, with the American narrative. He fed it, and it seems, it's the case. Any organization is going to be as good as its membership. Right. So you have, the OAS, had a very different feel when Correa was in power in Ecuador, when Argentina and Uruguay, Brazil, Venezuela, Cuba, El Salvador and Nicaragua. I mean, all of a sudden, if you may remember this or not, when, Hugo Chavez got up at a meeting, of heads of states of the Organization of American States and gave Obama a copy. He walked over to Obama and gave him a copy of Eduardo Galeano's The Open Veins of Latin America, which is basically a pillar, of a book about U.S. capitalist interest in Latin America, including every single possible war that was started in Central America on behalf of the United Fruit Company, copper in Chile, you name it. Eduardo Galeano wrote the sort of dictionary of U.S. intervention in Latin America, and Chavez, to the applause of almost everybody present at that time, gave Obama a copy of Open Veins of Latin America. I thought it was a classic historical moment. But yes, the organization today, with what's happening in Brazil, with the change in power, we are down to, before this victory in Bolivia, we were pretty much down to, to a left-leaning neoliberal government in Argentina, plagued with, problems and plagued with, issues of corruption and misleading of an otherwise legitimate leftist popular movement in that country. So you had Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, El Salvador, perhaps, and don't forget, there was a huge attempt at creating an independent banking system in Latin America under ALBA, and that, would have been the pathway towards true liberation and independence. As long as you have countries that are fully dependent on the United States for their trade, as long as these free trade agreements and bilateral agreements continue to basically, hold these economies hostage to U.S. banking, international banking, monetary financial institutions, banking. So the same thing that happened to, it was the same thing that happened under Gaddafi in Africa, right? I mean, one of the things that Gaddafi was working towards was an independent African banking system, backed with gold and backed with Libyan gold. And it wasn't long after he came up with that idea and he began to have some traction among some major countries in the continent, including South Africa, that the French and the Americans decided that Gaddafi needed to go. You know what I mean? At a time when Gaddafi had not been really doing anything against the West other than that, which is a lot more than than people think. And so the same thing was happening in Latin America. The creation of an independent economic bloc with its own banking system at a time when Venezuela's revenues were very high, at a time when Bolivia's revenues were very high, when Evo Morales had increased taxation on mining and the petro gas industry. The bottom line is that right now this will create a shift. We have some changes hopefully happening in Chile very soon. A lot of these regimes are at the brink of crumbling. Dissatisfaction. The pandemic has brought to a head some of the inherent flaws of inequality and exploitation of this capitalist puppet regimes, right?
Sure.
And so people are out on the streets, and the regimes are cracking down violently, killing people every single day in Colombia, killing people every single day in Chile. We have people beginning to mobilize again in Brazil. Ecuador is running a socialist candidate in this election. Based on what happened in Ecuador not that long ago, when we were witnessing all of those indigenous and working class uprisings, which again failed relatively because of intervention, but at the same time because there are still a lot of things to be ironed out in fragmentation.
That's a lot of words to avoid the truth that Lenin Moreno was a prick.
Yeah.
I mean, Rafael Correa was the real deal, and even though Moreno served in his administration, he couldn't wait to make a deal with the U.S.
Of course, and the IMF,
everything from selling out Julian Assange for a $4 billion loan to allowing bases in Ecuador, which Correa famously said, "You let me have a base in Miami, I'll let you have a base in Ecuador." Right? And
there was a base in Ecuador, and he closed it down.
Right, and that was Correa's argument. You let me have a base in Miami, y'all can have a base here. I mean, he was a badass, and then Moreno comes in under the auspices of the previous administration and just completely sells out the country.
No. But listen, what I meant about fragmentation is this. At the end of that uprising, when basically the popular movement had the government on its knees, they had pretty much closed down all the major cities, massive mobilizations. The students were beginning to join. It all started because of a sort of a problem around gas subsidies for workers, which was going to increase the fares for people to get to work. This is a country where not everybody owns a car. That kind of triggered it. But of course, the deal with the IMF had to do with that. So all of a sudden, what started as like, how does this affect me, led to a whole political radicalization as people began to learn what was behind it. At first, it's like they were out on the streets because they realized that this hike, that this reduction in subsidies was going to lead to a breadbasket break of the family, and so they took to the streets. Once in the streets, they began to get radicalized, learning that, the deal came from an IMF austerity plan that Moreno had cut with the IMF. Right. And so now people begin to, now they're learning about, how is capitalism responsible for this? What systems support this type of economic dynamic versus what is the alternative? So all of a sudden, people begin to realize the difference between Correa and Moreno. The problem is that once people were out on the streets, they were confronting the military, the police. The military would mobilize, and even more people would mobilize in response. And then they sat down and they bought into this idea of negotiations, and they got outmaneuvered, by the technocrats of this reactionary government. And the problem is that the COPEI, the indigenous organization that led those negotiations, does not have a radical platform. In other words, they have never had a radical platform, and they sat down, they negotiated, they told their people to go back home. They were critical in demobilizing this. It's not unlike what happened in Egypt.
Right.
In Tahrir Square, when they abandoned the people that were slaughtered right there and then because the liberal class cut a deal with the military.
Right.
They wanted the brotherhood to be taken out. They cut a deal, and basically the radical left, was left in Tahrir Square to be slaughtered. Now, this was not that different, so there is a lot of work to be done. And that's why I'm very hopeful about Ecuador with the emergence of an actual socialist party that is going to represent, pretty much the Correa line in the next election. And hopefully we will see a repeat of what happened in Bolivia.
Are we gonna? But let me ask you a question. What do you think is going to happen in Bolivia? Are we going to leave Bolivia alone? I know Elon Musk had a big hard on for all their cobalt. I mean, and he famously said a few weeks back, we can coup whoever we want.
Well, I believe that it would be one of those situations where at this point in time, it's something very interesting happened. Añez and Camacho and Mesa, they all accepted the results of the election real quick. So that there has been no claims of,
rigging, right?
Of mass people. Mass, by the way, stands for Movimiento al Socialismo, which is movement towards socialism. That's the name of the party that won. Nobody's claimed that mass operatives, stuffed ballots, nothing. So basically, the credibility of the election has not been challenged, which means that they don't really have anything to stand on to justify a coup. A coup would be seen as nothing but a coup. And that would give, basically, for one thing, it would prevent, the Europeans from coming to the rescue of the Americans in that narrative, right? I mean, it would be practically impossible for the EU to say, oh, yeah, every single country, in the European Union has recognized the results of the election, but, the coup makes sense. It's justified because why? They don't have a justification for a coup, so they would have to do it old style. They would have to pull, a massive, PR. I don't see it happening. I think, there may have been, there are, people are like saying, well, it's time to start locking them up, and then I saw an article today on some obscure news, how the leadership of the right had asked the United States for visas. Brokaw supposedly reported that. I did some research. I did not find any credible source that's happened. It wouldn't surprise me, but, I think they're going to bide their time. And I think that, we may not see a resurgence of the guy, who the party has already said that they're going to run, a peace and Luis Arce said, we are going to run a unity government. Okay, so I'm not quite sure. And then I saw Añez making her concession statement with like nothing but soldiers behind her. It was really surreal. So she's sitting there with all these dudes, wearing their fatigues and stuff, saying it's like, I accept the result of the elections, but I have these guys behind me just in case what? I think Arce is going to be expected to sort of play a different kind of game with the oligarchy, and it'll be hard to tell, right now, like what that's going to look like. I don't think the Bolivian people are going to accept another coup. The problem is that they're not armed, right? So again, we go back to the beginning of the conversation. What happens when you deny the inevitability that neither the oligarchy or empire is going to allow you to create a successful model of socialist transformation. I mean, it is that type of, I don't know, it puts a lot of these leaders who come to power under, kind of this capitalist democratic processes in this bind, because it's not as if like, okay, we're all Bolivians now and we are going to respect, the decisions, and we're going to respect the decisions of the government. No, from the moment that a progressive socialist government comes into power after an election in a Latin American country, the oligarchies disinvest, the oligarchies start to, work to create sabotage any possible undermining of the economy, like they did in Venezuela with the food distribution.
Right.
And if you start to nationalize, right, then they use the Organization of American States, they use the European Union to start accusing you of subverting democratic process through like the forced nationalization of key industries and interfering with free trade. And then they start to, pour millions and millions of dollars in convincing people that like they're going to turn your country into Stalinist Russia. And if you don't want that, then the problem is like people are beginning to, decades, if not centuries of this shit, the average people, especially in Bolivia, the indigenous people who suffered, perhaps more than any other people in Latin America, the, racist regimes, the racism of Germany related, Banzer, Hugo Banzer, who basically, treated the indigenous from as subhuman in his policies, in his internal policies in Bolivia when he was dictator there, from 1971 on. Hugo Banzer, anybody who wants to learn about Venezuelan history and institutionalized racism. So the indigenous people in Bolivia know very well. Don't forget, like one of the first things that Añez did was to burn the flag that symbolizes, the indigenous nation,
right.
With one hand on the Bible and another hand on the lighter,
Yeah, no kidding.
So, yeah, man. So these people. But by the way, Añez did run. She did run, and and in some ways, she turned out to be the best strategist of the bunch. Añez ran under her own party, and she was, she realized very early on that, that she was nowhere near, the other top three people. And so she threw in the towel. People were celebrating. Oh, Añez, the leader of the coup representative in government, running the country for the coup, drops out of the race. Well, the only reason she dropped out of the race was in hopes of what you were saying, trying to create a united front with the other right-wing parties. The problem is that, the party of Comunidad Ciudadana, who is run by a guy who studied in Spain and studied in the United States, fathoms themselves a Comunidad Ciudadanas, even the name, resembles the sort of center right party in Spain called Ciudadanos. They even use the same color, which is orange. Now, the emergence of this new center-right parties is an attempt to sort of, window dress the right-wing rhetoric in a new, more modern, more tolerant, it's just like a right-wing party for educated, frat boys and frat girls that, who say that some of their best friends are indigenous, right?
Yeah, right.
No, some of my best friends are darker than me.
Yeah. So we're not. So basically, this is the party in Europe, that is called the Liberal Party, right? Not the Liberal Party, but so they basically, believe that there needs to be sustainable development, sort of like neoliberalism, like the Democrats here. Okay, so
right.
just like just like a typical Democrat, supposedly moderate Democrat. That's what this guy, claims to be. Then of course, Camacho being, the who he was. And so, Camacho, formed a unity front, a united front called Creemos. So there were three fundamental blocks that competed in the election. The center right under Mesa, who basically pretended to be running this, like I said, this sort of like, Christian democratic, neoliberal, kind of new, young, vibrant right-wing party, and then the old guard, representing the oligarchy and the military. But to me, they're all in the same. The problem is, and this is to our benefit, you have to remember that a lot of the failures of the right in South America, not so much in this case because, Mas had the majority anyway, but in many ways, it is ingrained in a mentality of empire, right? In other words, it is ingrained in a mentality of caciquismo and basic the idea of self-aggrandizement. So a lot of these folks who are like Camacho, for instance, they can do away with the sort of idea of putting themselves first.
Well, okay,
words,
so
they're not as interested in advancing. They're not as smart as other capitalists and other oligarchs. The same thing is happening in Venezuela. They start to cannibalize each other because their ego, because they're coming straight out of a Spanish imperialist mentality.
It's been a long time. Now it's us. And wrapping up, we got a few minutes left. But in wrapping up, that's the challenge with all of this. The Spaniards have been gone a long time. It's been us, and we treat South America and Central America like the big red dog in our backyard, and we can do whatever the fuck we want if we even think there's a remote communist anything. And that's always been an excuse to go in and take their crap for free and enslave their people for no money.
Right.
And
right.
so, and so moving forward, what do you think we have to look forward in Bolivia? I mean, do you think this is going to stand and they're going to just do business and treat it, or are they going to treat it like Iran and Venezuela and sanction the hell out of them? I mean, how do you think this is going to go down?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. My reference to Spain was more about the mentality of the right-wing oligarchy and how inept they can prove themselves, to be, when they start to basically, go for each other's own throats, because, it's about advancing, that form of sort of caciquismo, the cult of themselves. So yes, no, but I mean, in terms of international policy, not that Spain has not played a negative role in Venezuela, by the way, doing up until recently when finally the socialists came to power. I mean, my goodness, they basically rolled out the carpet, for Guaido and the rest of those coup, and anti-democratic, right wingers, right? So yes, I mean, look, the role of the United States is going to continue. Now, it's going to be very, very hard, like we touched upon just a little while ago, without the excuse of a, election fraud, without the excuse of Mas having won this through intimidation or Mas, we'll have to see. They don't really right now have they're going to, I believe, it's interesting to understand the connection to the capitulation of the right wing. We need to really analyze that. I have never seen a right wing that led a coup and he led it as hatefully as this particular group of people did. With a kind of racist sort of narrative that was informing it. Conceding to losing power through a democratic election as easily as these people have. So I am waiting to see what kind of ugly surprise awaits me, when if there's going to be a show of cards of some sort, following the U.S. election.
Right.
Now what the United States is going to do, I mean, the same thing.
The same goddamn thing.
The same thing.
Same goddamn thing. There's not going to be a difference. Obama, Trump, Biden, Harris.
Right.
It's going to be the same goddamn thing.
Right. So Bolivia, is going to have to continue its efforts to, one of the first things that the president is going to do, basically he already said it. Luis Arce is to basically provide, with a basic income, for people to get them through this pandemic. So the resources of Bolivia, are grounded in mining, and oil and gas. The oil and gas industry, these days, those revenues are challenged. One of the problems that Venezuela is facing. But the copper and the gold and the silver, there's still a lot to be said for Bolivia's alternative resources. The problem. So we'll see. I mean, he's going to have to change. There's already been some key resignations in posts. We'll see if these people run. We'll see what the new regime, what the new government does in terms of trying to sort of create a different composition in the Bolivian military. I think it's going to be critical. Bolivia faces a lot of challenges, but the victory is going to be very, very difficult to overturn. They're going to keep doing to Bolivia. Now, if Bolivia decides to sort of, provide some olive branches to global capital, we know that there are key resources in Bolivia that they've had their eyes on, and that if Bolivia agrees to sort of, play ball with global capital, and especially with the mining industry around key, resources that the mining industry needs, like what's the name of that stuff that they put in the batteries? That
lithium, cobalt. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So Bolivia. It's loaded. There's one more.
And they also have natural gas too.
Yeah, they have natural. Right. But they want the minerals mostly right now. And so, we have it. So the problem is Morales was kind of already sort of willing to, cut some deals, and they still went for the throat.
Well, they went for the throat. I mean, listen, and we got to start shutting it down here. But they went for the throat because he wanted it on his own terms. He didn't want to do a Pinochet deal where he gets $500,000 in a Cadillac and lets the people get screwed. He was trying to keep the resources in the country. He was trying to keep a decent minimum wage. He was giving people free housing. He's doing all the stuff Chavez and Maduro do.
Right. So listen, but the thing is this: there are two different forces. Global capitalism. The Europeans and the Americans, don't give a shit whether the indigenous community got a new school or not. Global capital is not necessary.
That's right. That's why they wouldn't play ball with Morales. That's my point.
But that's the job of the Latin American oligarchy. So at one point, especially the Europeans, they've gotten to be pretty smart about this. Because the Europeans have their human rights charters and all this other shit. So that as long as the regimes play ball, and but the oligarchy doesn't necessarily want to relinquish their privilege. In other words, there is a reason why the lines are demarcated. It is very important for the Bolivian oligarchy, to not, mix those racial lines, to not surrender that territory. For centuries, that's the core. Racism is a very interesting thing in Latin America, as it is everywhere. But it is fundamental for the identity and of the Bolivian oligarchy and ruling class to maintain, the oppression of the indigenous people. They are invested in that, a lot more than global capital, even though global capital has historically benefited from that very same racism. But they don't give a shit about Morales, or this guy or the new guy,
they want a deal. They want a deal.
They want a deal.
They want a deal. This is my. There's no ethics here. The oligarchs in South America have no different a motive than the capitalists in Europe or wherever. They want a deal. They want the stuff for cheap, and if that means you got to enslave the people to do it, that's what it means.
But listen, but you're right. You're right in terms of as an economic class. But what people need to understand is that the very identity and the very existence of a supremacist class depends on the perpetration of institutionalized racism apart from the economic benefits. So the oligarchy is the interest of the Latin American oligarchy, especially in countries that are hugely racialized and segregated, like Brazil. And it's the separation of the races and the oppression of the race for its own sake, Abe. It is what the class gets identified as. It is what maintains their privilege to be able to have their fucking servants be people of color. You know what I mean? They don't hire white maids, because they need to have that. It's almost, because they are nothing, because they are this impotent legacy of a failed empire. And not only that, a fucking mongrel race to start off with in fucking the Iberian Peninsula. And they need to be able to feel that they're superior to something. And yes, once it comes with the economic exploitation, that's a huge part of it. The economic exploitation, and that's where they, cut sweet deals with the imperialists. And but at the same time, people have to understand that, racism and not only the economic reforms of Morales is what motivated the hatred, the racial hatred that was manifested in the street of Bolivia, will put your hairs on end. In other words, people need to understand how significant for the white European ruling classes of Latin America maintaining that social order of racist control, not just economic oppression, but outright racist control of power. They don't mix, they don't intermingle. It doesn't matter how rich you are. You're not going to be marrying an Indian in Bolivia, man, if you have Spanish blood in you. I can guarantee you that.
And listen, man, we got to wrap it up. But honestly, and I don't want to, get off on another subject, but I'm not optimistic. I'm going to see what happens, but I'm not optimistic. Whether it's Trump or whether it's Biden, I don't think this Bolivian election is going to stand.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would beg to disagree with you just out of sheer optimism, mate.
And that's why I host a show called The Bitter Truth, and that's the cross I bear. And it's and I would love to be wrong. And listen, I want to be wrong. When I saw that, man.
I mean, look. I mean, it's let's implement the precautionary principle of environmental health. Let's prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Because because I think that's what the Bolivian government needs to do. The problem is that preparing for the worst, the only solution that I see for preparing for the worst, is arming the people. And in this sort of bourgeois capitalist democracies, when arming the people is not in the It's not in the blueprint of leftist elected governments. You know, like even in Venezuela, you know, even though, you know, it's a lot better now, but it took Chavez a while, you know, to start realizing, like, hey, because he was a military man.
Right,
so, yeah,
right.
man, look, it's going to...
Okay, I'm going to have to stop. I'm going to have to stop because we keep doing this. I've been trying to wrap this show up for 12 minutes.
All right, sorry.
And it's just like, okay, we're going down the other rabbit hole.
A great victory for the Bolivian people, man, and they deserve celebration and they deserve our support. And we need to start organizing. We need to start organizing. I'm working with some comrades to try to revive the Latin American Solidarity Coalition, which was a very active, coalition of organizations in the United States that were working very closely to sort of, you know, educate and try to undermine U.S. imperialism to the best of our ability by informing people, educating people, working with local governments, you know, working with state governments, you know, to try to sort of, throw whatever monkey wrench we could into the workings of U.S. imperialism and their stooge oligarchies in Latin America. So, you know, we have to keep hoping that we can play an active role in supporting these changes. You know, otherwise, you know, we might as well just go and retire, man. You know, go to Cuba.
I get it. Well, guys, listen, my guest has been Adrian Boutureira, and we've been talking about Bolivia. Hopefully you got something out of it. Again, thebittertruth.info. Go there and help support the show. Listen to everything you want, anytime you want. Spotify, YouTube, the whole 9 yards. And if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.